Hello, my name is John Bumstead, and I have an Apple MacBook repair and refurbishing company. And through the course of running my business, I unexpectedly encountered the world of glitch art. I buy so many thousands of broken computers that I find the one in a thousand that does something that's creatively interesting, you could say. Um, so before I start, I want to mention that this presentation was first given at the Blue 80 art show in Paris, France in 2018. And Blue 80 was associated with the Glitch Artists Collective, which is a Facebook group that is all about glitch art and new media art and all of that. So if you're interested in this kind of art, I would definitely suggest following the Glitch Artists Collective because it's kind of a central hub of this community, and you'll see lots of great art and then also be informed of shows and things that are going on. So what do I do? In my company, I buy thousands of MacBooks from schools, corporations, recyclers, mostly recyclers. These entities, they use machines. Corporations use machines for 3 to 5 years, then they discard them. And so then I buy them from the recyclers generally in as-is condition, really cheap. Most of them are broken in some way. I repair and refurbish those, and then I sell them wholesale. So I sell generally to people who then in turn sell to individuals. It's more efficient for me to not deal with individuals if I can avoid them. But yeah, so basically laptops have their first life, the way I think of it, in the first 3 to 5 years, and then they're dumped, and then I pick them up, repair them, and give them their second life and put them back out into the world again. Um, so that's sort of a rundown of what I do. But it wasn't always that way. For 14 years before I started my business, I was in the corporate world, and so I was a drone. I was a clone. I was connected to the hive mind, so to speak. I was just one of these sad creatures sitting in a cube, you know, pretending to be busy 10 hours a day. And, in the beginning it was all right, but as it happens, eventually I wasn't very happy, and I needed to find my way out of there. And I was fortunate that I was able to do that. I figured out how to flip computers, and the second I realized that was viable, I jumped ship and I created Roadkill Incorporated, my company. And there's a little bit of irony to it because if you think about it, like I like to think like, oh, I differentiated myself, I disconnected myself and stopped being a clone. So I went from being a clone to differentiating myself, and then I started buying clones because these computers generally are kind of a blank slate. They're all the same, um, except for the ones that aren't. And that's what this presentation is about, the one in a thousand that is not quite like the others, that has differentiated itself and does something sort of interesting. So what I'm talking about in this presentation is hardware glitch. When the hardware is actually bad or defective or messed up in some way that it produces glitches. That is opposed to software glitch, which is involves writing code which produces glitches. So they're both legitimate. I just want to mention that I'm kind of on the hardware side of the glitch art world. And this here is an iBook G3 about 10 years ago, probably one of the first machines I encountered that did this sort of thing. And the iBook G3 in particular, there was a chronic issue. It was an epidemic, really. Millions of these machines started to go bad several years into their lives. And what was going on was the graphics chip, the GPU, was literally coming off the board. It wasn't fully connecting. All of the hundreds of pins were not fully connecting to the board. So if you picked the laptop up and pressed under the left side, what you could do is literally uh, press the chip back into the board with the pressure you applied, and the image would resolve itself. So I would open up these machines, and it was hilarious. You'd find all kinds of objects like jammed in there between the lower casing and the board just to try to create that pressure. Never worked long term. People would try other things. They'd use heat guns to try and like melt the chip back on the board. all kinds of ridiculous fixes that didn't really work. But yeah, there were millions of this machine that had this issue. And at this point, I wasn't thinking in terms of art. I was just thinking, oh, this is kind of cool. I'll take a picture and put it on my Instagram. So a little later on, I got a little more sophisticated about it. I would notice that if a machine had a video defect, an image might look a little more interesting. So here's a picture of a tree, that I took. I'm into taking pictures of trees, and I would notice that on specific laptops, it might look like it does on the right, with the colors sort of emphasized. And I liked that. And so I started to think about using these defective laptops as filters. You take images, put them on the laptop, see what it does to the image, then take a photograph of the screen. And the reason I would take photographs is that generally with hardware glitch, screen captures don't work. Not always, but they generally don't work because what the computer will give you is a file that represents what it should look like as opposed to what it is looking like on the screen. So, plus photographs are much higher resolution than the inherent resolution of a laptop screen. So with a good camera, you can sort of improve the resolution above, 1280 by 800 or whatever a laptop is. So yeah, I started loading batches of pictures onto machines with the intent of getting the effect of the glitch and then taking pictures. A little later on, yet more sophisticated, I would say, I noticed, for example, like with this broken screen, this has an image behind it. And depending on what the image behind it looked like, you would get some interesting results. So I would set up external hard drives to boot automatically into a slideshow to pull up a different image every 10 seconds. Because obviously the screen is not workable. You can't navigate the screen. But then I would have a machine like this sitting in a corner, just going through 1,000 pictures. And now and then I'd notice something interesting and take a photograph of that. So you need to load something onto the machine in order for the machine to glitch it, or at least that's the way I work. So for me, it tends to be about dead trees mostly. Something about trees. They're very similar to broken screens. They have that same sort of sprawling, organic, random element to it. I spend a lot of time overlaying trees onto screens, onto trees, onto screens. I go out into the forest and take pictures of, hundreds of pictures of trees, and I tend to focus on specific trees that I find. And every time I go out, I'll get closer and closer to those specific trees and take more pictures, during different times of the day, different seasons, all that sort of thing. So a lot of my source material is trees, dead flowers as well, and like I said, I collect them in batches. So go out, take 100 pictures, and then I tend to process those sort of in a batch. So here's my top secret process. This is kind of an idealized process. It's not always this smooth, but basically what goes on is I have lots of these glitchy laptops that have their issues, and I'll load my iPhoto library onto all of them, so they all have a replica of, my whole catalog of images. And then what I'll do is I'll pull up an image on one of these laptops, allow the laptop to distort it, I'll take a photograph, then that photograph replicates up to the cloud, and then it's replicated down again to all of the laptops. So then if I had used one laptop before, maybe I'll think, I'd like the effect of this other laptop on that image now. So I'll pull up that image, see what that laptop does to it, take a photograph, then that goes back up to the cloud and comes back down again. So it's this sort of circular process of layering onto these images using the laptops as filters. And then on the top, I say batches of original photos imported. So I kind of inject new images into the process by putting those on my photo library so that they get replicated down too. So there are a lot of different kinds of hardware glitch. I won't go through these now because I'm going into them in more detail a little later. But there are several varieties. And keep in mind, I'm not really scientific. So if I seem to be defining terms or telling you how it is, just keep in mind it's only my experience. I don't really have a scientific background, so it's just my experience. So GPU defects are far and away the most common kind of glitch that I encounter. GPU being the graphics processing unit, the chip that is responsible for putting an image on the screen. And when a GPU starts to go, it produces artifacts. An artifact is a visual representation of the fact that there is a problem. You can see these little squiggly yellow and blue artifacts, and these in particular that look like that are a very common early sign that a machine is starting to go. So if you see that, you're starting to enter glitch land, so to speak. So what causes a GPU defect? I tend to think of it in terms of a genetic predisposition. If you think about it, like if you're genetically predisposed to something, it's in your DNA. Like there's a problem, but it's latent. And with pressure and time and all of that, eventually you might trip over that, and then the condition might go into effect. It's kind of like that with laptops. There's generally a flaw in the GPU. There might be millions of machines that have that flawed GPU, and then as the years go by, more of the machines start to show the defect. The first few years they're out, basically no one very often will have a defect. No one's machines will be showing it, but then suddenly millions of machines start glitching, dying, that sort of thing. So, and then I should say too, there are a lot of machines that will just never do this. So there are certain years of MacBooks that are just really bad. 2008 was bad, 2011 was bad, but then 2012, very rare that you'd ever see any kind of glitching going on. And it also, if you see artifacts, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a bad GPU. You might just be pushing your machine a little too hard, sort of a overflow of data, so to speak. And then once you reel back and stop pushing it, your machine might be fine. So just because you see some occasional artifacts does not mean your machine's going to die soon. So GPU defects are inherently unstable and unpredictable. At this show, Blue 80, like I had two machines with GPU defects, and I had to constantly reboot them because what I had on display was they'd stop glitching or they'd do something different. It's just impossible to harness something that is broken so that it behaves in a predictable way. So there's that. The defects are generally affected by heat. So they cause heat, they tend to cause heat, and then they also behave differently at different heat levels. The most common symptom of a GPU defect is a black screen, which means it's dead. I would say 49 out of 50 machines I encounter with GPU defects just have a black screen and a sleep light. And that tells you how uncommon the interesting machines are. Vast majority of machines with bad GPUs are just dead machines. They're not doing anything worthy of note. And if it's not dead yet, it will be soon. Might be a day or a week or a month or a year. But if it shows a GPU defect, do what you can with it because it's not going to be around for too much longer. So it's not just a matter of loading source material onto the machine and then hoping the machine does something with it. You have to sort of provoke the glitch. You have to poke and prod it to heat it up to the point where you're awakening the monster, so to speak, and it starts to do what it does. Number of ways to do that. Different OS versions have different graphics drivers, video drivers. So the different video drivers interact differently with the glitch and produce different results. So I have piles of external hard drives I boot to on every machine, according to get different results out of the glitches on every machine. If you're browsing the internet, you want to try different browsers because different browsers react differently. Different image viewers, preview, VLC, QuickTime, the glitches might look different through those viewers. Different image sizes, 1200 by 800 image might glitch differently than a 4000 by 2000 image. And then there's provocation, provoking the glitch. I'll sit there for hours on the couch just moving quickly from one image to the next, resizing, zooming in and out, rotating, going to full screen. That really pushes a machine hard. And if you really want to push a machine, have like an HD video in the background playing while you're going through a list of images in the foreground. So these are all ways to kind of wake up the glitchiness of the machine. But it's a fine line. Like, you don't want to push it too hard because then the machine gets too hot and it just starts to reboot constantly. And when that happens, one thing you can do is put it in the freezer. Put the laptop in the freezer for about 10 minutes, and then you can start over. Just don't forget you put it in the freezer. So doing the work, as I suggested, it's a lot of work. Millions of small motions over time. I have a friend who knits, and her hands are always going. She can be talking to you and paying full attention, but doing this knitting thing. It's kind of like that. Like I said, I'm always on the couch just with a laptop there, messing around while I'm watching a show or something. So just lots of mindless work, hoping to see something that's worthy of taking a picture. I wouldn't really recommend doing this kind of art, glitch art, or this kind of glitch art, just because it's so inefficient. It takes so much time. There are much more straightforward ways of creating glitch art than this. Plus, like I said, I have access to so many computers that most people just would never see. I always try to automate whenever I can. When I'm sitting there repairing, I'll tend to have a bunch of machines around me that are glitching, going through slideshows and other things, so that I can, be productive and then hopefully out of the corner of my eye spot something that is worth taking a picture. So now we'll get to the fun part. I'm going to now tell you about different kinds of glitch art, or glitches that I have encountered. So certain machines go through a sequence of glitches, and the first in the sequence I would call geometric glitch, and it's exactly what you're seeing here. It's as I resize the image, you get these shapes all over it, and different colors, patterns, and I'm making it look like a movie. But if I was to stop, you would see the shapes freeze on top of the image. So I suppose the goal is to get a nice assortment of shapes and then take a photograph. Like I said, this happens frame by frame. And on machines that do this sequence of glitches, this happens when the machine is pretty cold. Like, you power it on, and if it does geometric glitch, it'll start doing it pretty soon after powering on. So here's exactly the same thing, just with a different image. So it gives you an idea of the difference, just with different source material. And then here are some images that I produced using this, primarily with this glitch. So a machine that goes through this sequence, it would have done that at low heat, but then it might heat up a little bit more, and the screen might kind of blip, and suddenly you're doing this sideways skewed glitch. It is what you see. It sort of folds the screen and skews the image diagonally. It works with video, whereas the geometric one doesn't really. So at medium heat you get this. Here's another example of exactly the same thing with a different image. And then here are some images that I've created using that. then third in this sequence, I call dot glitch. So you might have been doing the diagonal thing, and then suddenly you're in dot glitch mode as the machine gets really hot. And the problem with dot glitch is that you're in 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 danger of crashing because the machine is very hot. So I see this glitch mode a lot less frequently than the others. And dot glitch can be utilized by moving an image left and right rapidly, just kind of two fingers on a MacBook trackpad. And it's as if it throws the pixels off to the side. It's a really pretty sort of impressionistic effect. And I'll show you that here. So I'm just moving an image left and right. You can see how it becomes more abstract as you go. And then here are some images utilizing dot glitch. So like I said, the machines that go through this sequence, they start out when the machine's cold, then it warms up to geometric, sideways, dot glitch, and then your laptop crashes. So probably run across about 20 machines total that go through this kind of this sequence. Like I said, I'm not really scientific. I don't know what it means, and it might be related specifically to MacBooks. I don't know if PCs do the same thing as these machines do or not. Hard to say. So aside from that sequence of hardware glitches, GPU glitches, there are other GPU glitches that are kind of distinct. There are some machines that don't do that sequence, but they do this, and I call this blocky glitch, which is kind of what you see here. It's just a pattern, sort of a checkerboard pattern on top of the image. Highly unstable, very sensitive to heat. It's hard to put one of these on display at a show because they just crash or freeze. But it's a really nice, interesting effect. And here are a few images of that. And then there are other machines that do something entirely different. I call this the electronic ballet. Sometimes you power on a machine and it fades in from white or fades in from black, white to black or black to white, and then it does some sort of goofy performance, and then it fades back out again. You might power it off, power it on, and it might do exactly the same thing again, or it might do a variation, or it might just be a dead machine at that point. You never know. They're very erratic and very difficult to capture. I've seen a lot better of these than I've managed to capture, because often when you realize you have one, it's too late and then it's gone. But they have this odd performance-like aspect to them. This one's fading from black to white, then I think it'll go from white to black, back and forth. This one has a screen defect, as well as the electronic ballet going on. So this screen probably took a hit and therefore is misrepresenting what it should be displaying. Plus there's a performance going on. Here's one that goes to red, then I think it fades to black, and then probably to white again. So all kinds of goofy machines like these. And lastly, for GPU glitches, there's what I call this is what I call text glitch. Obviously, this I've only run across this on one machine, and it's fairly recent that it came around, that I found this one. This is a MacBook Pro, and it only does this with the old operating system called Mavericks, macOS Mavericks, and only Mavericks with an outdated version of the Safari browser. So it'll do this with SVG files and with HTML fonts. But you load a different browser, you load a different operating system, and the machine performs normally. So very odd. And like I said, it's the only machine I've encountered. Here are some examples of that. Okay, so we've been talking about GPU glitches. The GPU is bad, defective, problematic, producing an image that is flawed. Video system glitches are a whole other category, and they're not GPU related. So in a video system glitch issue, the GPU is fine, but the computer's ability to put the image on the screen is flawed in some way. It has something to do with the screen being bad, the video cable, or perhaps the socket on the board, the video socket. It's often a crimped cable. Some of the pins aren't connecting. Sometimes the video cable just isn't plugged in fully. When you open a laptop and close it 1,000 times, sometimes it kind of tugs at the video connection, so it's a little bit out of the socket. And video system glitches result in an overemphasis of a color or several colors. As you can see here, we've got red and blue. And I have a pile of red machines, green machines, blue machines, and then other machines that do a combination of colors. So sometimes accidents happen on purpose, and yeah, I make a lot of accidents happen. The cool thing about video system glitches is that you can create these machines. The GPU glitches that I showed you, you might never see a machine that actually does that because you don't have access to thousands of computers. But you can create a machine with a video issue. You can just start pulling pins out of the cable, like these pins you can see here. It often affects color changes. You can also just, like I said, just kind of nudge the cable out of the socket so that it's in that in-between space where it starts to affect the image, and then you can just kind of tape it down and start using it when you see something you like. Don't pull the wrong pin though, because then it's game over. But it is something you can try. You can get a bunch of old laptops and try this. Here's a diagram at the bottom. I used to try to diagram what would happen so that I could predictably create these. So here are some examples. This is a machine that emphasizes all colors, as you can see, and it was one of my favorites, but unfortunately it fixed itself. It was a drone, but it differentiated itself, but now it's a drone again. So I have piles of these machines that used to do something interesting, and now they're just working computers. So I keep those around, power them on now and then, see if they've come back. Mostly they never do, but one can hope. That's another one from that machine. This machine has a defective screen. You can see sort of a color band that is distorted. That's one in action. As you can see, it's fun to put stuff behind and see how it looks. Same with this here. So I deal with a lot of broken screens. Probably 20% of the computers I get have broken screens. And then on top of that, I break a lot of screens. If in the refurbishing world, a screen has a scratch or bright spots, or it's probably not usable as on a computer. You probably can't sell it that way. So I figure, hey, might as well break those screens, because in the recycling world, a broken screen versus an intact screen, they all get recycled the same way. So it's not like it's doing any additional damage to break that screen environmentally. So yeah, I'll use a rubber mallet and a screwdriver most of the time. That will produce this sort of flower effect that you see here. You can also just kind of grab the screen and sort of press in with both thumbs just sort of bend it until it snaps. And that produces a really nice effect that looks like the wing of a bird with sort of feathers spanning outward. But don't press too hard because there are bulbs inside the screen. And if you break those bulbs, then you have no light and it's game over. Also, I would say if you break a screen, you want to take pictures of it pretty quickly because what you're doing is you're releasing the liquid crystals that exist inside that screen. And they're very intricate and detailed initially, but they will sort of clump together, sort of like water pooling. And so the image, in a matter of minutes or hours, will lose detail. So here are some examples of broken screens. This is a really good example of the detail that you can get if you take the picture quickly. Here are some broken screens in a collage on top of another broken screen. This is a great example of having a nice image behind a broken screen. You wouldn't have that kind of color if it was just, say, a white screen behind there. And that one too. So here's a nice image of a sunset, and you've got some land out on the water and some trees coming out of that land. And oh wait, actually, it's just a broken screen with an image behind it. So this is something I like to do. I like to confuse you if I can. You know, if I can make you think an artifact is something natural or something natural is an artifact, that's kind of fun for me. That's kind of a victory. Most of my art is kind of in the aesthetic realm about color and texture and juxtaposition and things like that. But if I can confuse you, then in terms of intent, I guess that's probably one of the directions that I like to go in. All right, so now something completely different. I want to talk about taking apart the screen. You know, what is the screen made of, and what can you do with it? So you know, I've run across so many smashed screens that I ended up sitting there with the pieces in my hands and moving them around and noticing a few things that were interesting. So if you look at a screen sideways, it's very, you know, it's like less than a ½ inch thick, but it has all these layers in it. Every LCD screen has two glass layers, two glass sheets, and what they do is they sandwich between them liquid crystals, which are liquid crystals are this sort of oily clear liquid, and sandwiched between the two glass layers. And then on the front sheet of glass and on the back sheet of glass is a sheet of plastic stuck to either side that is polarized. They look sort of like transparencies, like clear transparencies, except they're darker. Those are stuck to either side, the front glass layer and the back glass layer. Then on the back you have the LCD backlight bulbs, and then you have the video cable connecting to the back of the screen. And the video signal kind of dictates what those liquid crystals do. They sort of dance according to what the video cable, well, the video signal, the GPU, tells them to do. They're under the control of the GPU. And then, of course, on the other side, you have the visible screen. So what's going on here is I'm holding one of those polarized layers, those plastic layers that I've taken off a screen. And I'm showing you what happens when you turn it when you're looking at machines that are working machines. These machines, the liquid crystals are under the control of their GPUs. So there's simply an on or an off function when you turn the polarized layer. So this machine has a broken screen. And so when you do the same thing, you can see that the liquid crystals have sort of clumped up into blobs. And they're no longer under control of the GPU. So when you turn the sheet, you notice different colors at different angles. So noticing that, I realized, well, if there are different colors at different angles, why not cut the back polarized layer into strips? and then position each strip at a slightly different angle. And then if you look at the thing through the front polarized layer, you're getting the effect of all the different angles at the same time, each angle being a slightly different color. So that led me to, create machines like this. And here are some examples of what I've done with that kind of effect. This is a photo of that machine that I just showed. And lastly, there's sort of a technique I've developed called, I call it painting with liquid crystals. Should have called it finger painting with liquid crystals. So basically, I told you there are the two sheets of glass and then the liquid crystals between them. So what I'm doing is I'm reaching between the layers and messing with the liquid crystals and then pressing it back together to see what I get. Typically, I would use a brush, not my fingers. This was just a sort of a crude demonstration. But you can get some interesting effects doing this. Here I'm showing you that the polarized layers are in fact necessary. If you look between the two sheets of glass, you see nothing. But then you look through the layers and you see the liquid crystals. So I would generally open this up, paint something, and then close it up and see what I got. It's hard to work with these. It's not entirely straightforward, but you can get some interesting results. This is a similar scenario. I'm pulling the layers apart, layers of glass, and smooshing them back together. This machine still has a video signal connected, and you can see the different colors, the rainbows of colors. The GPU is still trying to tell those liquid crystals what to do, but since the screen is broken, it's kind of failing, and you're just getting this mishmash of a distorted video signal plus, all the other effects. Somewhat similar, no video signal here, but you have the polarized layers at different angles, and then you also have the liquid crystals appearing and then pulling apart as the layers of glass are moved. And then we have some examples of what I've done with that technique. All right, so we're pretty close to the end here. But first, just a few thoughts on, art in general. And, so I obviously use a fairly non-traditional form of art. And that's led me to think a lot about, well, what does this mean? Am I a legitimate artist? What exactly is going on here? And so I've come up with certain ways of justifying it and thinking about it and sort of breaking it down. And so on the right here, these are funnels, if it's not clear. And the idea is, if you look through your eyes at the world, you see an infinite number of potential images. But you don't capture all of those. There's the infinite, and it funnels down to perhaps 300 images a week that I take pictures of with my camera. So from the infinite down to 300, say. And then those 300, I will glitch those, and perhaps I produce 50 a week that have, been successfully glitched and I consider to be, not horrible. And then from those 50, those will filter down to perhaps 1 or 2 images a week that I'm actually ready to present to the world that reflect what I want to see. So from the infinite down to 1 or 2 a week. And that's how I see it. My job as an artist is to curate and distill mass quantities of material, and I act in collaboration with the laptops. The laptops show me the options, you could say. They say, what about this, what about this, what about this, millions of times, and I choose between those options. I also choose between the filters to use, the filters being the laptops. I choose the order to use them. I obviously pick the source material as well. I crop the images. So in all these ways, there are dozens of decisions being made uh, related to any given image. A lot of people will look at glitch art and say, well, that's not really art because you're just taking pictures of things that happen. But they're not realizing, most likely, how many decisions there are to be made um, in relation to any given uh, video or image. So with glitch art, there's always this idea that sort of uh, permeates the whole thing. Uh, that glitch is fleeting. You know, glitch is just something that happens briefly, and you better catch it or it's gone. Um, a star shines most brightly the moment before it dies. I'm not sure if that's true, but it sounds good, and it's certainly relevant to glitch art. It's also the idea that if you fly too high, you get burnt by the sun. So you get as high as you're ever going to go, and then the next second you're tumbling down to the earth. Um, so with me, it always kind of comes back to the trees. I'm always seeking out these trees that are at their peak. And when a tree is at its peak, it's the biggest it's ever going to be, and it dies and it loses its leaves and it presents itself as this sort of grand masterpiece. And it's the biggest it's ever going to be. But in that very same moment, when it dies, its internal structure degrades and it rots and it gets eaten by bugs. And the forest services that see dead trees as a hazard because they might blow over and hurt someone, they go out and they cut them down, and the wind blows them over all the time. So it's the same thing as with the star. These trees get to a certain point and then they quickly fall apart. Um, and you have to capture them at that moment. I'll find these trees that are at their peak, and I'll visit them week after week and take more and more and more pictures. But every time I go out there, I'm aware that it might be the last time I see it, because so many times I've gone out to see a favorite tree, and like this one, um, I realize that it's gone, and like this one, and like this one as well. So it just sort of points to the fact that as artists, it's our job to see the things that no one else is seeing, and before those things disappear forever, make sure to take a picture. And that is it. Thank you very much. I hope you got something from this, and if you want to be in touch, I can be reached at my website, which is roadkillincorporated.com. It's spelled rdklinc.com. Again, rdklinc.com. And on that website, you can ask me hardware repair questions. You can ask for a quote on your broken laptop, and I might buy it. You can see my glitch art, and basically there are links to get a hold of me in any given way. So thanks again for watching, and talk to you soon.